Now I would like to invite our panelist, Mr. Ashish Rajpal, who is currently the founder of XSEED Education, and Mr. Pranjal Kumar, who is the global CFO and head of corporate development at Eruditus. Mr. Vaibhav Singh, who is the founder of Leap Finance, will not be available with us today due to medical reasons. So I would like to invite the panelist and the moderator, Mr. Abhishek Gupta, to take this discussion forward. Thank you so much.
Hi Pranjal, hi Ashish. Pranjal, you're on mute.
Hey Ashish, hi. Hey Abhishek. Hi, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you both for taking out time for this session. I'm sure the audience would benefit from. Would love to hear your views on the ecosystem. So great. I think thank you for taking time. I think we have certain set of questions, and we'll try to take in some Q&A as and when sort of whatever sort of time allows us. Pranjal, I think because I think trying to sort of keep the same order, we started with higher education first. So maybe sort of just getting your views on higher education. So I think there's been a lot of talk about how it has grown, and I think truly one of the sectors where India is exporting to the world, and I think Eruditus, they've really sort of demonstrated it. Where let's say we are not just importing but exporting it to the world. So how are you seeing the opportunity play out in the last 2 years, especially in the context of COVID and the regulations that have regulation context that has been laid out in NEP?
Yeah, no, I think last 2-3 years have seen an inflection point in higher education in India. I think if I talk about higher education and then specifically about tech in higher education, I think in general, if you look at the higher education, that's got disrupted by COVID for sure. And what is also done is, surprisingly, if you look at some of the numbers, you'll find that the international enrollments from Indian students have also plateaued, and rightly so, because of the travel restrictions that the COVID has imposed on students. So that's been obviously a big shift in the market. Having said that, what we've also seen is that the government has enabled an ecosystem where you are now seeing a lot of quality initiatives coming in with the rankings, and the fact that there's more autonomy being given to institutions which are of eminence or of higher quality. So there's an enabling framework now in the domestic higher education ecosystem to enable or to promote quality, right, and try and achieve also the mission that the government has set up for a gross enrollment ratio of 40%. So clearly, that's been a disruption. If I talk about tech within higher education, I think that has seen a significant, a shift and a huge tailwind in the last 2 to 3 years. Clearly, the international university brands have started to become more and more excited about the India domestic market. You've also seen that the Indian university brands have increasingly adopted tech and online programs, and all of this I think has been fueled by the enabling regulatory framework where the government has clarified what is allowed and what is not allowed in the ecosystem of higher education tech. So that's been a significant sort of a change for providers and platforms like us, and of course others in the ecosystem. This has been a great boon, and clearly these universities who have traditionally been only providing classroom education and hence not very savvy with the online ecosystem have embraced us as their preferred partners to distribute education and make it affordable and accessible in the domestic market. So I think very, very bullish trends in this ecosystem. I would suspect that going forward as well, one would see this trend continuing, and premium institutions and tier 1 institutions will start to become more prominent and take away some of the student share from the tier 3, tier 4 university brands through the means of online education. And I think that's a shift that one can expect in the next 4 to 5 years, where your top tier university brands will become increasingly dominant, and the ones which are not providing high quality education or outcomes will start to falter. And that's obviously another big alarm for some of the players who need to get their act together.
Right, right. No, I think absolutely interesting, and I think will be sort of good to get your views also on the kind of growth I think we can anticipate here. Do our numbers look achievable, or or is it hinges on the regulatory development?
No, I think so. So I would say this. I mean, again, in your presentation, you covered some of those aspects, right? So I think clearly there is. I think K-12 had been or K-12 EdTech had been the poster segment
Right.
for education for a long while, right? And I think now is the time for higher ed to also shine, and you can clearly see that from the M&A activity also that's happening, and K-12 players getting into higher ed space, right? So I think there is clearly a huge amount of growth, right? Again, the numbers speak for themselves. There are 32 million students plus which are in the ecosystem. Virtually all of them are taking now either a skilling course or a add-on online course, or are considering to take that. I remember a statistics where it said 90% actually are considering to take an add-on course or a top-up course along with what they're doing. So I would expect the higher ed tech system to become increasingly more prominent. Now, my sense is, players like us and similar players are growing at 100% plus year on year. And if I were to take that as as a surrogate for how the market is growing, I'm sure you can expect, a similar trend to continue at least the next 3-4 years, as this grows. Right. So that's exciting. I think one thing that I'll point out is sometimes the stakeholders draw a parallel between this and distance education. But I believe that this is a different model compared to the erstwhile distance education model, because the providers here are very focused on outcomes. And hence, you would see a lot more adoption of online degrees, online certificate program, because of the focus of these providers on learning outcomes and career outcomes, unlike in the distance education, which was a much more passive way of learning and a much more independent way of learning.
Right, right. No, yeah, interesting. I think I'll have some more. I have some more questions noted down. But I think for Ashish, I think just want to understand from you. I think having you here, I think one of the first players in the ecosystem. Just how has this opportunity shaped up? I think we as an outsider are looking at the opportunity on school digitization very closely. But in the last 2 years, who have really picked this up? Who are these schools who are opting for it? Where are you seeing the growth coming from? I think any commentary or flavor on that?
So I heard part of your presentation, Abhishek, and you framed this part of the discussion as school digitization. So I'll kind of stay with that description and make 3 or 4 points, and then you tell me if there's more you'd like to know. I think I completely agree. Last 2 years have been absolutely phenomenal for us who work very closely with schools in India and elsewhere. There has been a Pacific Ocean of change. But to me, the biggest change is in teacher habit and not in infrastructure, as could be implied from what you were saying, in my view. It is fascinating to see teachers who were terrified of use of technology and were the nemesis of many edtech companies in the school context, have completely changed. I think that's not an over exaggeration. Of course, the bottom 20% in anything doesn't change. And the whole psychology of this, as someone wrote in the FT, that it's felt like you slept in 2019 and woke up in 2030. I don't know for how many things it is true for, but for teacher attitudes on technology, it is certainly true. So I think that is the most phenomenal thing that has happened. And we are talking about small schools and small towns, and not only in India, in other developing markets, we know we have seen a similar trend. Necessity is the mother of invention, as they say. And in this case, it has certainly happened. It has not so much happened by rapid adoption of infrastructure by schools. Schools were shut for the most part. And to understand the root cause of what happened, you have to go to the problem that was solved. Basically, teachers were stuck at home, kids were stuck at home. And it was through existing tools like Zoom or Microsoft or Google Drive, less so Google Classroom, I would say, which is more like a rich school phenomena. That adoption of these existing free tools has brought this big change. And I'm talking from a system-wide impact standpoint. So to me, that's the most phenomenal thing that has happened. And that, of course, opens many other doors in turn of opportunity. Having said that, I think what you said is true, that school owners, and that's the segment which is most, my customers happen to be that, the 400,000 affordable private schools of India. The government million schools, slightly different kind of buying behavior, as you know. Their eyes have opened that, oh my God, all this is possible through technology, then why not? And that in turn has led to whatever things you've seen in the funding space and in the operator space in the last 18 months. But I think, without sounding like a pessimist, I think this business of school digitization is not a new thing. It's been around for 15 years. And you had that big EduComp and many EduComp-like companies.
Right.
And I think there are 4 characteristics of that phenomena, which are worth recalling. One, very high adoption by schools because of the attractiveness of infrastructure. And in developing countries in general, anything hardware is very attractive. And the main reason was school oversupply in the 90s and early 2000s. So they saw infrastructure as a way to differentiate versus competitor schools. So let's go get a lot of this attractive infrastructure. 2, low teacher usage. 3, as a result, low collections. And 4, as a result of the first 3, low retention, high turnover. I won't pay you. And if you come very hard, I can always go back to books. The big difference along these 4 factors is the second one, that usage has started.
Right.
So that changes the whole game. How it pans out, I don't know, but I think the other risks remain. There's a lot of free money available. China is where it is, as you know. So India is attracting that much more money as a result. And so the optics at a high level look very attractive. The final point I want to make in all of this, and this is kind of a slightly more personal take, student outcomes are not the conversation anywhere. And therein also lies a huge opportunity. I think what will happen to the market is it will parse out into 2, into hardware and infrastructure plays, and what I'm calling quality plays, or more software-like plays. And because COVID also opened the eyes of the parents, for the first time, they could see the classroom and they could see what is happening to their child. I think that awareness opens up the door to quality. So those 2 segments may end up behaving very differently in terms of how quickly they grow, what the retention levels are, how quickly they turn to profitability, and how sticky the customers are. So those are some kind of preliminary thoughts of what you provoked.
Right. I think just a follow up there. So, which kind of schools have really been more open to it? So I think, as you've mentioned, it's the private schools and not the government schools. And any sort of trends you're seeing, maybe certain regions of India or certain, let's say, fee point of schools that are latching onto it? Where do you think the need is more acute?
No, I didn't say that it didn't happen in government. I just said I don't know much about government school space. Right. I think the phenomena we're speaking about was across the board. Big schools, small schools, big city, small city. I think that was a unifying factor. The digitization phenomena has shown a natural ceiling of 20 to 25,000 schools.
Right.
All stories, including the big claim stories, it never backed up by cash collections, which matched a story of 25,000, seem to peak off there. I thought your number of 10,000 was conservative. I don't know what the source is. It's probably higher. But I think the game is how far will it go and what happens to that infrastructure? How much does it get used? Does it actually impact quality? Does it basically attract lots of players and it becomes a revolving door between various players? So the school feels like it's winning, but there is no sustainable play. Questions, I may sound a bit pessimistic, but I think it's a very interesting opportunity which needs to be watched carefully. But there seems to be a natural ceiling, which may be broached now post-COVID.
Right, right. Pranjal, I think coming in from there, I think how trends are playing, especially I think the tier 3, tier 4 universities where we all know that tech infrastructure is not great. Do we anticipate, let's say, similar solutions to come up there, which is, let's say, maybe college digitization of sorts, for lack of a better word? Is that something that you're seeing?
Yeah, so I think, again, just drawing from where, Ashish left off and the lessons learned in the K-12 market, I think the higher ed space, clearly, infrastructure, tech infrastructure will get, employed. I think, like he said, necessity is the mother of invention. So these university partners are also now increasingly adopting or have an online strategy, right, to cover up for a hybrid model, as as one of the questions was or comments was mentioned in the Q&A box as well. So I think all universities will now have a hybrid model, and whether they're a tier 1 university or a tier 3, tier 4 university. In fact, tier 3, tier 4 universities are faster than tier 1 universities because the tier 1 universities are more protective of the brand. Their decision-making process is slower because of all the factors around it. The tier 3, tier 4 are much faster. So that is bound to happen. But I think at the end of the day, the lesson from K-12 is that quality rules over infrastructure, right? And I think that is what I would emphasize on. And again, drawing the framework that Ashish mentioned, a beautiful one, which is that, look, at the end of the day, it's all about usage, adoption, student outcomes, right? And I think, as I shared with you, I think increasingly tier 3, tier 4 partners will require a different set of capability building than tier 1, tier 2 universities. So tier 1, tier 2 universities will say, look, I know how education is done. We have built a strong brand. We know how to deliver it. We need a partner to market, to help us with the text, solution, etc. But at the end of the day, we will drive it. We have been in conversations with, the IIMs, the IITs, etc. And, all those conversations are about, okay, my faculty will teach live, right? We will deliver the curriculum, etc. Right? So that is the conversation that they'll have. They don't need support on capacity building on the education side. They need support on capacity building on the marketing, on the tech, on the infra side to some extent, if I use the word infra loosely.
Right.
The tier 3, tier 4 brands will actually need capacity building on the education side.
Right.
That's a nuance between, how they will want to partner with a third-party provider, right? So they will say, okay, help us in building an industry-relevant curriculum, help us drive student outcomes. And I think that will be the shift that you will see. But I do expect the long tail to struggle. In the offline market, anyways, they are struggling. There are quite a few universities which are open, but the enrollments are not there. And I expect that struggle to increase as the market starts to shift towards a better outcome.
Right.
The other trend which I'll add to this, which we didn't cover fully in our first leg of the discussion, is you will also see students and recruiters not insisting on the traditional credentials for placements. And we're seeing that even now, right? A lot of digital companies are open-minded about recruiting students based on their portfolio of work and skills rather than just a credential. So that shift again will eat into the tier 3, tier 4 university brand, because traditionally they have been a degree market, right? So they've been giving degrees, but now the market is shifting to skills, and that will again eat up into the tier 3, tier 4 university brand.
Right. So what I'm sort of reading is essentially it's not us versus them. I think there's a lot of collaboration and coexistence that will happen with the universities, right? It's not going to be just the edtech versus traditional that is being put across in media loosely.
Oh, no. I think that, again, like you talk about school digitization, I think if I were to use that loosely as university digitization, I think that is going to be the predominant trend, especially in the domestic market. Education brands are not built in decades, they're built in centuries, right? So it's very, very difficult for anybody to, think about, and you'll see that also, right? Increasingly players who started with this thesis of building their own brands have, then pivoted or, steered towards partnering with universities. We are a big, advocate of that. I don't think that is the trend. What I do see though, is if you break the higher ed into higher ed and working professionals, because there's a component of higher ed for working professionals also.
Correct.
In the working professional space, especially, with work experience of more than 5 years or so, when job is an important criteria, but it's not a, binary or a polar view, right? You've already been in a job, etc. There you will see the affinity for an industry partnered program or for a self-branded program, depending on the outcomes. But the traditional higher ed market, I don't see that any player trying to, crack that market through a self-brand. No, you have to rely on institutions.
Right. Yeah. Sort of multiple winners to emerge. Yeah. Great. No, so Ashish, I think one sort of trend that we have seen in K-12 and higher education play out is a lot of consolidation that has happened. I think still sort of early days for this space. Let's say school digitization again, to put it loosely. Are you expecting? I think now that multiple players are coming, it's heating up a little. Is again? Do we expect this to be a trend, and why or why not? Any views there?
Short answer is yes. I think that's going to happen more and more.
Right.
I think you would have better answers why, but the two I can think of is, one, because a lot of capital has been raised in a hurry. Obviously, not all of them will perform. So willingness to catapult or basically look for an exit, the willingness is going to be much higher, I think, in the next 2 years than it might have been otherwise. The other is that it's a multifaceted problem, as everybody keeps finding out. The more you go into education, there is no silver bullet answer. And so you say that, okay, then I want to try and create as whole a solution. So let me try and get the other part of the puzzle as opposed to build it myself. I mean, in our own very small way, assessment was an area which we were very keen on. And we thought we needed capability injected. And so we made an assessment company acquisition a couple of years ago. And that was very, very helpful from a capability standpoint. I'm not touching about other issues. If you've got 5 private equities in, then they obviously want to keep expanding the pie rapidly and other such pressures. But purely from an operator standpoint, I think you can safely say there will be consolidation quite rapidly. Now, how much of it will kind of work out, I don't know. But that should be the trend.
Okay. So I think just sort of last bit of questions, I think from you both. I think maybe some crystal ball gazing on where do you see this in next 2 to 3 years? Is it are we expecting sort of this unbundling of education to happen for higher education? And for this school digitization piece, is this now sort of going to be the norm? Is it like, let's say what you said, 400, we have 400,000 schools, just 10%, that's about 2.5% penetration. Are we going to see it like 15%, 20%, 50%? Any some bit of any thought from you?
So maybe I can go first. And I think Ashish made a very relevant point of habit change, right? And habit change has happened across the ecosystem, not just for teachers, but also for learners, for their parents, for recruiters. So if I were to crystal ball gaze for next 5 years, let us say, right, I think that habit change has already occurred, and hence hybrid is a future, right? And it will remain it will remain now. Edtech penetration, at least globally, is less than 3%. If you take the K-12 plus higher ed combined. Retail is 11% in the US. E-commerce retail in the US is about 11% and growing much faster. So if I were to hazard a guess, I would say that, EdTech penetration would be definitely in double digits, not the crazy 50%, 60%, but clearly in that range of 10, 15%. More so in the higher end working professional space than in the K-12 space. From a learner perspective, right? So from a learner perspective, they will be very comfortable doing online. It's convenient, the outcomes are great, etc. From a K-12 perspective, I think ultimately the parents have to send their kids to schools. They want to go to their jobs, all of that. So that will, possibly, play as a factor for school digitization. But obviously after school, again, you will see a lot of, again, tech coming in versus the traditional tutor models. Because of convenience, outcomes, etc. So I would say double digits percentage definitely in the next 5 years is what I expect where India could be.
Interesting. And any thoughts from you, Ashish, on some bit of?
So I think from my perspective, as I said earlier, I think the trend to watch is infrastructure plays versus outcome plays. Over the next decade, I'm saying, maybe not 1 or 2 years, but I think that's how it's going to pan out. And the lines between B2B and B2C will blur as a consequence. I liked your word of unbundling. I think that's going to happen in schools again, because parents have suddenly seen, and even school owners, I can see it in their eyes, have seen that schools have run without brick and mortar for 18 months. So what does that mean? Earlier, there was a question, oh, how can school possibly run, And then even parents were like, we won't pay the fee because what is then? Then slowly that realization happened that this pandemic is not going away. So life began. So I think as opposed to the B2B, B2C division, which obviously in some ways will stay forever, but the lines will blur and the difference will become infrastructure, which will attract high capital and obviously will have interests of the capital-oriented plays. And I would stick my neck out and say not 10, 15, 100%. It's an enormous opportunity that cannot stop. Now, the question is, what kind of player is offering what? More mobile or more kind of...
is it end-to-end integrated or maybe just...
Yeah, there'll be thin slices in different...
Unbundling.
But the quality outcome is going to be, I think that's an unanswered question.
Right.
And it's going to be a very exciting space. Let's see what happens then.
Right. I think, Pranjal, we have one question, I think, for you. Essentially, I think, where do you see sort of, I think, the whole sort of higher education and let's say working professional reskilling or upskilling? And there's also the third element that has come in, which is, let's say, corporate L&D or enterprise learning that's happening. So the enterprise who are spending on learning of their employees. Where do you see bulk of the growth to come from, which is, let's say, the most low-hanging fruit here, or how do you see these opportunities play out differently?
Yeah, so I think if you were to slice it, B2B globally at least has been a bigger market size than B2C.
Right.
India is different, and again, India may end up becoming more self-sponsored, and we have seen that in K-12 also, right? Globally, K-12 B2B is much bigger than B2C, but in India the dynamics is different. So if you were to ask me a question on B2B versus B2C, I would say we will see a lot more B2C tech adoption, because the B2B has figured out a mechanism where through their in-house training, through their own campuses, etc., they have been able to retain, reskill their people, and hence scalable models will emerge more on the B2C side. Within the B2C side, again, there's one question on certificates versus outcomes. I think increasingly you will see more outcomes, and that is happening when we talk to recruiters, etc. Ultimately, it comes back to recruitment and jobs, right? It's very clear that they are looking for portfolio of work. They are looking for skill.
Right.
The degree is not going anywhere. The students will get a degree, but the career will be built on skills, not on a degree, unless and until the degree is from a tier 1 institution.
Got it. No, I think all fair points. Pranjal and Ashish, thank you so much for taking out time for this discussion. I think we really enjoyed it, and we'll be in touch. So thank you again. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Ashish.
Thank
Pleasure.
you. Thank you.